Happy Friday, you guys. Hello. So I'm running just a tad late today. Hope you don't mind. I had a couple of people wanting to join the group, so I was trying to get you guys added to our group here before I went live in case you wanted to join me today. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to jump in because I know it usually takes you guys a few minutes to actually get here. So I'll just talk for a few minutes. Yesterday, I was finishing up a call with a couple who has decided to actually work with me privately. I actually hadn't even had a chance to announce to you guys that I had a couple of private coaching spots coming open before some people contacted me asking for private coaching, and so those spots got taken. If anybody has been thinking about private coaching with me, you can always message me and ask me if I have any availability coming up. And because I only take, literally I cap myself out at 5. And honestly, sometimes I only take 3 or 4 private coaching clients at a time because it's really intensive, the work that I do with private coaching clients. It's nothing like counseling, you guys. We do get on at least weekly calls, but I'm also interacting with you almost on a daily basis for like 2 months. So it's super intensive, I kind of move in with you guys virtually. So if it's something you're interested in working with me in the future, make sure you message me so you can get on the waiting list, really. So anyway, right at the end of that call, the guy asked me what that was right there. And so I'm going to show it to you guys. This is what it is. Let's see if you can read it. Being brave means doing what you are afraid to do. So this couple actually laughed and said it was a great ending to their call because their marriage is really in high crisis right now, which a lot of folks are at that point when they do come to me for coaching. They're at a point where they're at a make it or break it place, and they've been to counseling a lot of times, and it's really made things worse. And so taking the leap to work with me in coaching is sometimes takes a lot of courage because it does cost a lot of money to work with me. But it's honestly, I see so many relationships turn around, and it's amazing to see the transformation. Hey, Rianne, it's good to see you. So you're interested in the a webinar about diagnosis I saw. So I am going to be putting that together for you guys. Diagnosis, it's so complicated what has happened over the last decade, really. The labels that we use are confusing. And so when you start to Google, some of the websites that are out there are old and outdated. And so the terminology that you find when you're trying to find and learn about traits and mannerisms, you can find old terminology. And so it can just be really confusing because what we used to use, the definitions or the labels that we use to diagnose autism spectrum disorders have completely changed over the last decade. And in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association here in the U.S., we made a major shift in what we call different forms of autism spectrum disorder, especially the higher functioning forms. And so things like pervasive developmental disorder, NOS, not otherwise specified, which is a huge mouthful, became a form of mild autism, and Aspergers became a form of mild autism. And I saw some of you yesterday in the thread in the group mentioning what some of you were calling it passive avoidance, demand avoidance. It's actually pathological demand avoidance, I think is what I've seen it more referred to. And that's not actually a technical diagnosis, even in the UK, but it's a trait that has come up that is a very common thing that I see, a trait of individuals on the spectrum that I see come up a lot in the different groups that I'm in. And so it's a trait of individuals on the spectrum that that demand avoidance that we see, that demand avoidance meaning really a pushback when a demand or a perceived demand is placed on an individual. A lot of that has to do with difficulties with executive functioning, which is how we execute functioning, how we actually execute tasks, how we go about doing things. So anyway, I'm going to start putting together a webinar for you guys just to go through the diagnosis and how those of us who are professionals and how professionals actually do diagnose autism spectrum disorders, and we'll talk about the terminology and what it means and the sensory. I already have the webinar that I did on sensory processing, which, by the way, is not available to you guys right now because I'm repurposing that for a self-study course, but I should hopefully have that out for you guys here soon. I'm just talking. I know some of you are here. Ask me your questions. I'm going to keep babbling until I see some questions. So whatever you've got for me, start typing it away in the little chat box here. If you're new here and you've never been on my Ask Me Anything Live Friday, this is just an opportunity for you to ask me whatever you want to know about autism and Asperger's, your relationships, me, whatever. It's time for us to chat. Hi, Auntie. Good to see you. Rianne. Okay, here you guys are finally talking to me. Okay. Rianne says in the UK, they also changed everything. Apparently, they don't Asperger's, so I'm confused on how it's like. Yeah, I know. And Asperger's is a term that, interestingly, here in the US, and I'm not sure about the coding system for insurance billing that's used there in the UK, but here in the United States, it's still in the medical, what we call the ICD-10, which is what medical doctors and nurses use. It's still, Asperger's is still a code in the ICD-10, but in the psychiatric community, the counseling and psychologists, that community, when we bill to insurance companies, we use a different set of codes, and it's been taken out of those. So it's really confusing. But it's all still the same thing. It's all still the same neurological, developmental set of traits, and it's the same thing. It's just a different set of labels. And you will hear me use the term Asperger's still quite a bit. I'll use autism, Asperger's, interchangeably because I started working in this field way before they changed it. And a lot of people who were diagnosed with Asperger's way before they changed it still identify as having Asperger's. So I try to kind of go back and forth to speak to everybody, but I'm referring to the same thing. Cindy, hello. Okay, you say, hi, Jodi. How do you handle social relationships with others when your AS husband has no filter in what he says, which is usually not a good thing? It can be very embarrassing. Yes. Okay, so I'm hearing you talk. You're talking about when you're in a social setting and your husband just really has no filter, doesn't have that ability to gauge when it's appropriate to say what, and so there's no telling what comes out. So I think it really depends on the setting that you're in. And it can be embarrassing for you because this is your husband. And I think one of the most important things to do here, and this can be so hard, but one of the most important things to do here is to recognize that you are not your husband. In other words, you are responsible for you, and he is responsible for him. And so many times we feel attached to our husband. We feel like we are somehow judged, and maybe we are at times, maybe we judge other people according to their families and their husbands or their children. But we have to at some point recognize that we're not responsible for how our husbands behave. He's responsible for how he behaves. And people are going to assess him based on him and you based on you. And same with our children. As a mother, sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, what are people going to think about me based on how my child acts? And people do, they judge. But it's very freeing when we separate ourselves from that and we recognize that our kids are separate from us, our husbands, our partners are separate from us. Everybody in our world, we are only responsible for us. And so we have to take responsibility for us, because really, when we are trying to feel accountable and responsible for the way somebody else in our life is behaving, it's impossible. We're in an impossible situation. We're putting ourselves in an impossible place, because we can never, ever, 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 ever truly be accountable for the way somebody else is, for their personality, for the way they behave, the way they act, whether it's our spouse, our partner, our kid. We're just accountable for us. And if somebody else judges our partner, we can kind of shrug, be like, Now, it can be tough. Like if you have the boss over this, and this is the one thing that you can do is be a little bit preemptive. So if you know that your partner is likely to make major errors, social errors, blunders, you can be preemptive and just not put yourself in social situations that could be potentially harmful to you and your family. So if you know your partner may blunder to your boss, then you may just choose in advance not to put yourself in social situations with your boss, with your partner. So maybe you choose, even though you would like to, you would in a perfect world, an ideal world, your partner would go to the company Christmas party with you. But in a real world, you know that your partner may say or do something at the company Christmas party that is inappropriate, so you choose to go alone. And you may feel sad that you can't bring your partner with you, but we have to base ourselves in reality, not in idealistic. And then also decide what are our deal breakers in our life. Is this something that is really truly, honest? I've got my 2 to 10 model. It's on my website. If you guys haven't seen it, it's my 2 to 10, how to figure out, what our deal breakers are, how important things are to us. And, where does it fall on that? Is having my husband with me in some of these social settings, where does it fall on my 0 to 10 really? 10s are deal breakers. I can't live without this. Is having him with me in some of these social situations something that, in the grand scheme of things, sometimes it may actually make your life a little bit more pleasant. Angie, I don't have as much problem with mine saying inappropriate things, but he's one that talks loud and energetically and dramatic, and I get embarrassed. I try to cue him and he gets defensive and offended. Okay, so you're getting embarrassed because he's being loud. Again, this is when you stop and think about, you are being embarrassed because of the behavior of somebody else. Really, he's the one being loud. You're not doing anything that's embarrassing. It's your husband. So I get that can be difficult. So if you're this is something you cannot control his behavior, and it's not something that he may not be aware of his tone. this is where you may want to be preemptive about it and choose not to be in settings. He may be loud in restaurants, so maybe you want to choose restaurants where it's louder. The atmosphere is louder. Maybe not go to quiet little restaurants where there's, music playing softly in the background. If you're in a grocery store, tell them, here's your cart, here's mine. I'm going this way, you go that way. I'll meet you back in the front of the store. Be preemptive so that you can kind of build in. And if you hear him across the store, you can just think to yourself, I'm glad I'm not with him right now. Because changing him is not really for you to do. And I know that kind of sounds, maybe that sounds harsh, but he is who he is. And even though we're embarrassed by their behavior, it's not really for us to change them, especially if they're not receptive to it. If you have a partner who's like, you know what, I realize that I'm making social blunders and I want your help with this, then we can cue them and say, okay, here's an example. We're in Walmart. You're being a little bit loud. But if your partner's not receptive to it and he doesn't mind that he's being loud and he doesn't care that other people are glaring at him and he doesn't want your input and he doesn't want your help, then it's really not your job to give him input and help. And this is hard for us because we see society going, dude, you're being loud. And we want to cue him. But in reality, it's not our place. He is his own individual person and he gets to decide if that's important to him or not. And you get to decide where that is in your deal breakers. And if you can choose to be in situations where choose to alter, set things up where you're not having to be around him when he's being loud whenever possible. And sometimes you may just be embarrassed. There are times it's just we have to learn how to deal with uncomfortable sometimes. Hi, Jen. How are you today? Jen, in the beginning of our journey, pathological avoidance disorder was a term that was used as well as Aspergers before we met you. So, yep. So I hear pathological avoidance, pathological demand, avoidance. There's all these different terms that float around. And basically, it's not really, not something that it's not a disorder, if you will, but it's a trait. It's an avoidant trait that we see it's part of the dynamic, particularly in relationships where you get into this cycle where I've talked about this a little bit in the group and on other lives, where this cycle where you guys get into where you've got a neurotypical partner who's kind of pursuing. And in the last thread, or not the last thread, a thread this week where I talked about fighting for your relationship, most of the men who come to me, the men on the spectrum, and even the women on the spectrum, I very rarely hear this expression from them. I'm fighting for my relationship. Those of us, and I'll include myself in this, who fight for our relationship, we're going after it. We're trying to fix it. We're going after it. And our partners are like, they're like, oh my God. And that's not to say we're doing anything wrong, because we're trying to fix it. And funny enough, they're fixers a lot of times. But they're avoiding us, and we're pursuing them, trying to fix it. Both partners are going about it wrong, though, because you guys don't know how to truly fix it, and it just reinforces this cycle that never gets better, doesn't fix the relationship. Somebody's pursuing and somebody's running away. Communication, you guys don't know how to communicate, which is what we learn to do in the communication group. Hi, Nathan. Hi, nice to see you here. Marianne, you think they make it simple for us to understand? You'd think, but not so much. Nathan, I agree, Cindy. My partner and I are both not NT, but I have more social issues than my wife, so you're both on the spectrum. Okay. Um, so how, what are your thoughts on that, Nathan? What do you do? What do you do in a social situation when you're saying you have more social issues than your wife? So what would your advice be to Cindy? If I'm reading that correctly, what would your advice be to be? Be to her. Huh. My brain just totally got into a traffic jam there, trying to talk. Angie, at what point do you or should you explain a parent having ASD to your child? I worry about some of the effects in my child, which jury is out on if my son may be with jury. Yeah, I know you're curious about that. But we talk about dad's ASD with him. He's 6. Well, I think that, part of that has to do with whether or not it's clear that dad is actually on the spectrum. And when dad's not it depends on if dad is in total agreement. So there's a couple of answers to this question, and I know in your situation, I think dad is on board with that. And so if dad is on board with being on the spectrum, then I think it's great to actually reveal that as soon as possible, because it minimizes the negativity about it. And if there's any chance whatsoever that your son's on the spectrum too, it also introduces the idea of this is what this is, and this is what it means, and this is what we're learning about it, and this is what explains some of dad's mannerisms and traits. And then if your son ends up getting diagnosed with it, then it's normalized a bit for him as well, and it helps him understand himself. It gives him, as you guys know, if you've known me for a while, if you've been here for a while, you know that I'm a huge advocate for revealing this to children if they're on the spectrum, because it gives them a framework. We talked about this in a thread or a live last week, I think. It gives them a framework for understanding themselves. And so many folks who are really high functioning as adults, Rianne, you've said this, when they realize as adults, oh, that's what this has been all my life. I mean, I've not met one adult yet. Well, I have met a few. Actually, most of them don't come to me. But there are adults who are still kind of in denial and are so fearful of feeling like something's wrong with them, and they feel criticized. There are those folks, but so many others feel like it's finally an answer, and it helps them understand what they've already known is different. There's always something different about themselves. And so it's a framework. So if you already know dad is on the spectrum, then already go ahead and share with your son what you know. It's like if you know dad has diabetes, or if you know you have high blood pressure and there's a reason why you can't eat as much salt. You teach these things to your kids, and there's no shame at all in having autism. It's just a different way the brain is wired and the way it works. And because of that, these are the things that we see in the way we interact and we behave, and we see these differences. So it's an explanation. Crystal, hi. I'm so happy I finally get to catch this live. Yay! I'm glad you're here too. Yeah, Angie, I thought so. Yeah, that he was diagnosed. Okay, Karen, thanks, Jodi. This makes me feel better. I have done just this through the years by separating myself from such situations with him, like social, family, grocery store, etc. Lonely, but preferred by me, my boundaries, taking care of me, not him, not us. Seems selfish, but brings freedom. And that whole it seems selfish piece, I want you to start challenging yourself on that. And anybody else listening to this live or listening to the replay, if you feel like that's selfish, I want you to stop and evaluate where that comes from. I want you to ask yourself, where does that come from? I'm always asking my clients, where does that come from? Where does that come from? Why does that feel selfish? Why does it feel selfish that you want to take care of you? Why does it feel selfish that you want to go to the grocery store alone, or you want to do social things on your own? One of my clients this week started to hanging out with some girlfriends for the first time, and I asked her, I was like, "Do you feel like you're betraying your husband at all in this?" And she was like, "No, I don't. I really don't." And those of us women, neurotypical women, who end up in relationships with men on the spectrum, oftentimes we are so devoted and dedicated to our children and our husbands and our partners. We put our entire lives into them, and we feel selfish for doing anything for ourselves. We put ourselves last. Angie, you put in a thread this week, mama comes last, or in a message to me or an email private, somewhere you said that to me. And you're right. We put ourselves last, and we've gotten that message at some point along the way that that's what we're supposed to do. And that we're being selfish if we take care of us. But back when we could fly on airplanes before COVID happened, what did they tell you? Those of you who've flown a lot, what did they tell you when the little safety thing, the little safety video at the beginning, if the airplane decompresses and the little oxygen masks fall down, did they tell you to take care of your child first, or did they tell you to take care of you first? What did they tell you? They tell you to put your mask on first. Why do they tell you that? Because if you can't breathe, and if you can't survive without oxygen, you cannot take care of everybody else. It's that simple, you guys. We have to take care of us. And if that means going to the grocery store by ourselves, going to social events, going out with our friends, doing things on our own, we have to take care of us. And so many of you have not done this. And by the time you get to me, or you go to counseling, or your marriage is, and I'm holding you accountable for this. And a lot of you are like, well, him, he this. Yes, and he this a lot. There's a lot of accountability on his part too. But part of your accountability is that you have taken care of everybody else and not you. Angie, what if dad doesn't want to be open about that? I know he has freedom, who he discloses that to himself, but what if he doesn't want the child to know, which I agree, I think we should. Okay, then that's something, I think dad's privacy is important, and we do have to respect dad's privacy. So that's a conversation to have multiple times along the way, and it's not a conversation to badger dad about, because we don't want to badger. But I would want to have a conversation about what that means to dad, and not just, I think we need to do this. Why don't you want to do this? But I'm all about uncovering the layers. And I would want us to ask, I would want to I'm all about discovery. I'm a detective. So I'd want to have a conversation with dad and say, okay, let's talk about this some more, so that as time goes by, I want to understand more. What does that mean to you? What is the reason why you don't want him to know? So I can understand. I want to understand. So that, that as we go through life, and if our son is diagnosed with autism, is that a point at which you want to share it with him? So just investigate more. But if dad doesn't want to share it, then that is his right at this point. Yes, Nathan, I totally agree. Not really selfish, self-care. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between being selfish. Selfish is when we put ourselves ahead of others repeatedly. When we repeatedly look, we look to take, to put ourselves ahead of everybody else regularly, or we put our own needs ahead of others despite any harm done to them, or we take care of our own needs even when it, when other people's needs are not taken into an account at all, or what we need ends up really doing them harm in some way. That's selfish. There's a big difference. Rianne is telling Nathan, I have no filter as well, so end up in trouble with friends and family. Yeah. Okay, Crystal, I just want to ask, my partner and I are having a difficult time communicating, and it's causing a lot of arguments. One example is when I wanted to work on a fun project with him, and when I asked him for ideas, he just, hold on, and I opened it up. Okay, he just blatantly said no, and I took that as him not really interested on things that I do and asked him to participate with. His explanation to me is that he's just trying to understand why I would want to work on something that I have no idea about. I feel ignored and feel like there's a lack of interest on his side for things I like, and I confront him a lot regarding this, which leads to him now being anxious to respond to things that I say because he knows that it will likely disappoint me. Sorry. At one point, he already asked me, how do I want him to react, and whatever options possible. It's like I'm still not happy. Any tips on how to actually tackle these things? We're both blaming ourselves for not understanding each other. Him because he's aware he doesn't communicate normally, and me because I couldn't understand him despite knowing each other for more than a year. Okay, so what you're talking about here is what you both are bringing to the conversation and to the interaction. And this is a critical breakdown in so much communication. And so the communication transformation group this is one of the stages that we're going to cover. Well, we cover all the stages of communication in the communication group that I've got enrollment open for. But this stage is the one that is missed a lot. And it's one of the most important stages that trips us up in our relationships. And what's happening here is that you both are bringing different expectations, different goals, different understandings about what you're wanting out of this interaction, what you're wanting out of this conversation, and what you're wanting out of the actual the goal for the conversation, which is this project. And then, what you bring to it is as important as how you interact about it. But a lot of the conflict happens about not just how you interact about it, but then that's stage two. Stage 3 is what the meaning you take away from it. And this is where you guys are also getting tripped up. And this is where so many of us get tripped up as well. We assign meaning to our interactions. And the meaning that you're assigning is all sorts of things. You know, you think that he doesn't, he's not interested in the things that you do. He's thinking that, and he's thinking about, why does she want to even work on something that she doesn't understand? He's now bringing to the conversation anxiety because he thinks it's going to disappoint you. That's what he's bringing to it. So he's assigning meaning to your conversations that you're upset about whatever his response is going to be. And so it's just getting derailed all over the place. So you guys don't know how to even start a conversation, recognizing what you're bringing to it, interact in a way that you are able to talk and reflect, speak and reflect, listen and reflect to hear each other, and then walk away from the conversation with the same meaning that you understood each other. And then stage 4 is about how we recall and remember conversations accurately. And so that we, and by the way, our memories are really, we don't remember things accurately. But a lot of times our arguments and conflict happens about, he said, she said, how we remember things. So tips on this, it's super important to really get on the same page about what you're bringing to it and what your expectations are for what you're wanting to talk about, what your objectives, your goals, and even what your perceptions are about your relationship and what you want, how you want to interact. And, I'm hearing that you want, quality time maybe is important to you. And so this is, when you ask him to do this project with you, this is part of how you feel loved. That's what you're bringing to it. So, Crystal, I'm glad you asked this question because this is a very good example of how relationships absolutely derail because of a breakdown in various stages of communication. And this is exactly what this communication transformation coaching group is about, guys. This is the foundation for your relationship, everybody. This right here. And I have seen relationships go from we are on the brink of divorce to, oh my gosh, we are connected now. And we are on the same page in 6 weeks. So I started this live, if you weren't here at the beginning, showing you being brave means doing what you're afraid to do. If you are in any way struggling, which I know you are if you're here, with communication in your relationship, this coaching group is a no-brainer, you guys. It's a no-brainer. It's if you're married, especially, and on the brink of divorce, this is what is it, like $250 a month? It's a whole lot less than a divorce. And if you have children and you're going to divorce, you're going to have to communicate the rest of your life anyway. It's a no-brainer, and this will absolutely give you the tools, even if your partner doesn't participate. It's going to give you massive amounts of information about how you're communicating, not just with your partner, but with your children and with your your mother and your father if they're still alive, and with your coworkers. It's huge. Okay. Nathan, you guys are talking to each other, you and Rian. Angie says, our counseling sessions lately, he pointed out about talking more in I feel statements. Example, when you do things that way, I feel hurt, or when you don't acknowledge my views, I feel devalued. It does help, and less confrontational way to talk. Yes, that's definitely something that traditional therapy is emotion-based, as we talked about. And so it really encourages those types of statements. And those are helpful. Those are definitely helpful in identifying the emotions that are there that contribute to the breakdown of communication. It's a start. It's just a start, though. And it will get you started, at least in identifying what you're feeling in these conversations. Where I find that it stops short is in giving you actual tools to unpackage the communication breakdown and then fix it so that from start to finish you're having an actual conversation where you both are on the same page. Rian's talking to Nathan, avoiding social situations, and COVID's really for everybody. Crystal says, thank you. I'm really interested. However, the schedule is something I've been considering. Also, can I join the communication transformation group alone without my partner? Yeah, I think I just answered that for you. Yes, absolutely. It's for individuals and or partners. Anytime just one person in a system, in a relationship as a system, changes makes any kind of change, the whole thing changes. So one person in a relationship can learn a tremendous amount in this group and then apply it to the relationship, and even teach these skills to their partner, or just start applying it themselves. And then, yes, so it's not just a couples group. And as far as the schedule, I just want to make sure everybody knows it's optimal if you can participate live, but all the calls are recorded for replay. And so you can hop in and watch the replay if you can't be on all of them live, which they start, this group starts Tuesdays, August 25th, Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, um, and there will be a couple of bonus calls that will be, I think, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we just, the curriculum, I'll go through the curriculum on the regular calls, which is like a slideshows and everything. And all of that is available in your portal, the slideshows and the workbook and everything. You'll have a workbook and slideshows presentation that you can download. Let's see. Nathan says, yes, my counselor gave me a packet on empathetic communication because it's so important to go beyond the active listening piece. Yeah, and so you're talking about identifying the feelings like Angie just mentioned. Yeah, so a lot of what I teach my autistic folks is to learn to label an emotion that they're hearing from their partner. I'm hearing sadness. I hear frustration. I hear irritation. I hear confusion. I hear anger. To listen. And sometimes that means I had one client who literally had a list of emotions on his phone that he kept in his notes. And so, because sometimes he had a very kind of smaller range of emotions that he could really bring up into his mind. And so he could look at that list and then go, oh, that's what I'm seeing. And then what I always teach people is to check it out. Don't ever assume that, and this is a mistake that a lot of folks make, whether you're neurotypical or autistic, is that you think you know what you're seeing and you don't check it out with your partner. So you think you know, and instead of saying, hey, I what I'm hearing is blah, 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 or what I'm seeing is blah, 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 blah. Am I getting that right? Am I hearing that correctly? And then we give our partner a chance to clarify. What a lot of us do is we're not even listening to our partner, you guys. We're thinking about what we're going to say next. And we don't even hear what our partner said. Raise your hand. I know you're guilty. I've done it too. Nathan, I tend to talk at my partner, which is one way, not really empathetic. Yes. Talking at her, that's what I'm talking about just now. We talk at them. We tell them what we want to say. We're thinking about what we think about. And autistic folks are not the only ones to do this. Neurotypical partners do this too. Neurotypical partners are more often the ones that will stop and listen, though. I will say that. My autistic folks tend to get stuck talking at more and forget to listen. Neurotypical partners do more listening. My autistic folks forget to listen. But my neurotypical partners also forget to listen. And they're also thinking, especially when we get stuck in an antagonistic cycle. When we're antagonistic and everybody's defensive and everybody's in the fight or flight, fists in the air, we're thinking about what we want to say next. And we're not hearing our partner. And Crystal just admitted, I'm so guilty of this. Just thinking about what to answer next and not listening. Yeah, we do. And part of what does this is when we go into fight or flight mode. So the minute a conversation is antagonistic and we feel like we're fighting, we got fists in the air. Okay? So we're thinking about our next point, our next statement, and, oh, well, you think you did, blah, blah, blah. And we may not even we may not even feel like we're being antagonistic. We may feel like we're being very calm and we're trying to make a point, but we're still thinking about our next point. But truthfully, we're still in this opposite teams. We're on opposite teams. And so ping pong. You say something, I say something. You say something, I say something. Back and forth, back and forth. Instead of sitting down on the same side and being collaborative to fix this. And when we get on the same side, instead of ping-ponging back and forth, each person gets a turn and we stop and listen. So I say something or you say something and I say, okay, it's your turn right now. So what I'm hearing you say is, blah, 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 blah. Did I get that right? Well, actually, what I meant was blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now what I'm hearing you say. So it's all totally your partner's turn for a while. and you're reflecting back what you're hearing until everybody's clear, then you get a turn to say, okay, well, let me respond to that. And sometimes we even walk away and say, okay, let me just think about that for a little while. And can we come back to this in maybe half an hour or maybe tonight after dinner? That is so not what many couples are used to doing. We want to tit for tat right now. And that doesn't work. It never works. It doesn't. It's not once we get in this cycle of boom, 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 boom. And then that whole avoidant thing happens because folks on the spectrum, men and women, whether you're a woman on the spectrum or a man on the spectrum, once that happens, avoid, run away, whoop. It's because their executive functioning, they're going to process these conversations at a slower pace. Has nothing to do with intelligence. It just has to do with language processing. So as we're throwing a lot of words at them, they're trying to process all this, and it's just overload, and they start to shut down. And so they're like, I'm out of here. Bye-bye. Shut down. And we're like, ugh. And that's where the avoidance kicks. And it feels like, well, I can't have a conversation with my autistic partner. They just shut down. And it's because we're in this cycle, and we're just like throwing so much at them, they can't process it. And, you know, I know in both of my relationships with autistic partners, there was a time limit. And I didn't know my husband was autistic. Not really. I didn't really understand that completely until after we were divorced. 19 years. But I remember he had a time limit. And I'm very verbal, as you can see. And then the man that I was with for 2.5 years, I mean, his time limit was like 10 minutes. And after 3 minutes, he thought 10 minutes was already up. So I had to learn how to speak very succinctly and say what I needed to say in 3 minutes or less. And that was what he could process. Nathan, thanks so much. Definitely need to get unstuck and not forget to listen. Yeah, it's important. Crystal, yes, exactly. Especially when I feel attacked by something, I'll do my best to win that argument. Yeah, I know. Exactly. You're on opposite sides. You're trying to win. Yep. I see hearts on that. Thumbs up. Nathan says, true, especially if I don't feel the criticism is constructive yet. Yes, avoid and run away. Uh-huh. My wife shuts down. I go like the talkative vomit. I like that term. That's true. Nathan, I'm on both extreme ends. Either I shut down or just vomit words. And yeah, and so whenever we get into that cycle, somebody starts vomiting the words and somebody shuts down. And it's not productive at all. And nothing's happening except for you guys are growing farther and farther apart in your relationship. And if you're early on in a relationship, you may tend to think, well, we'll figure this out. But those of you who are 10 or 15 or 20 years into your relationship, you already know right now that you didn't figure it out. And now you're really your relationship's in bad shape. You're probably sleeping in separate rooms. You feel like roommates. Some of you are just so disconnected that you barely even talk to each other anymore, or it's just nothing but conflict, and you just kind of left with what now? You're together for the kids, or you're together because of your faith, or you're together because of financial reasons, but there's no relationship left. That doesn't mean it can't be fixed. It depends on a lot of factors, but these things don't fix themselves, you guys. They just don't. I told a couple yesterday, you have 3 choices. You can either fix this. We can work on this together and we can fix this. You can leave it the way it is, and your relationship will fail eventually. It's just a matter of time. Or you can end it now. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's the reality, and that's what I see, and that's what I have seen as a coach and as a therapist. And I'm just going to put it to you guys. If you don't fix this communication breakdown, it won't fix itself. It's just It won't. Angie, when you feel like you're doing all the work, you're more invested than the partner. How do you deal with the hurt and exhaustion of doing all the work? I get it. If we change ourselves by nature, we'll get better responses, but it takes so much energy. And when you feel like you're doing all the work, it just makes you feel tired, used, and took advantage of. Before his diagnosis, I did this. It got better, but I just felt used, hurt, exhausted because I was working on me, but it left me feeling drained and hurt. I was talking about this in the group yesterday. The balance is completely off when one of you is doing all the work, and you can't. You have to stop. You have to stop doing all the work. And relationships don't always survive. And I am not saying this as an advocate of divorce at all. Divorce is a nightmare. Divorce is devastating for individuals, for couples, for children. I'm divorced, and it was horrible. But one person doing all the work is also not going to ever fix it. And the only prayer of the chance of fixing it is if you stop doing all the work, because your partner will never show up to do his share of the work if you continue doing it. And most women, and I count myself in this list, in this, who do more of the work, we do it because we're fearful of the relationship failing. We're desperate for it to work. We step up when others don't, but it won't fix it. And so the only way it can possibly be fixed is if you stop doing all the work. It may still not fix it, but I can guarantee you, 100% guarantee you, that if you continue to do all the work, your relationship will not survive. As a relationship anyway, you may stay married, but you may end up being one of these married couples that just completely live separate lives as roommates down the hall. It doesn't work when one person does all the work. It just doesn't. Angie says, my time limit is 1 minute, 10 minutes, a minute, 10 seconds. That's shorter than my 3 minutes I had. My OCD, I'm a word spewer too, bad habit. Jen says, question, I now ask my husband, what does that face mean? Instead of assigning a feeling to my husband. Awesome. I read facial expressions, read tone and silence. Now that I no longer need to do that, I just ask him, what does that face mean? And he tells me it's not something I need to do. It makes it so much easier. So what I'm hearing you say is that you used to interpret his facial expression and you assigned meaning to it instead of asking him, what does that face mean? Because you would see a facial expression and interpret it to mean something, but you might have been wrong, and then you would assign meaning to it and possibly interpret his facial expression to mean he's angry at you or he's upset with you, and you could have been very wrong about that. And that's what couples do. It's what we do. But now if you say, hey, what does that face mean? And he's able to tell you, then you don't miss each other. Now you know. Awesome. Julie, my husband thinks our communication is just fine, and it's all me just being hurtful when I say the wrong things. Trying to figure out where to go from here with him. Our communication is not fine at all. As long as I don't say anything wrong, we have superficial conversations. I'm empty inside, but he thinks all is well. And this goes back to what I was just saying. There's a total imbalance there, Julie. It's totally imbalanced. And if he believes it's fine and is putting pretty much all, and I haven't had a chance to respond, I don't think. I can't remember if I responded to what you said in the other thread. I did see your post or your comment, and I wasn't able to respond, or maybe I did, I can't remember, but about this. When someone basically, when a partner alleviates themselves of all responsibility and says, it's not me, it's not, none of this is me, this is all you, and if you just didn't say anything wrong to hurt me, then we would be fine. There's not there's not collaboration there. There's not a whole lot that can, there's not a relationship there. That's not two-way. That's one-sided, and that's one person being made responsible for all of the work. And that is not a relationship, and that is completely imbalanced. And as long as you or anybody in that situation continues to buy into that, not that you are agreeing or buying into that, but any level of buying into that and any accommodating that basically does the work, and it will not. And as you're saying, you're empty inside, and of course you are, because you are not, you don't have a voice. Your voice is completely cut off in that situation, because what you have to say is not being received at all. And when in a relationship with someone who is basically shutting you down and saying, I'm not willing to do any of the work myself at all, it takes two people to have a relationship. One person can't do all the work. It cannot work that way. It just can't. Nathan says, kind of like my wife's face palm at me. I'm not sure who you were referring to there. Let's see. So sorry, Julie. I bet my wife feels the same way, at least at times. Julie says, he even tells me the success of us depends on me. And you know what? That, in my opinion, is an abusive statement. I'm just going to share that with you. Putting the success of a relationship on one person, that's just flat out controlling, and that's power, and that's manipulation, and it's toxic. That's toxic. And unless he in some way is willing to show up in this relationship, you can't do this. You can't do it by yourself, and it's not yours to own by yourself. Period. Okay, guys, we got about 5 more minutes. As always, great conversation. Angie, I just don't know how to get him to see outside of that wall of perception. He sees fault in other people more than himself, and that perception issue is one of our biggest issues. I guess I just need to learn and understand his ASD, be more understanding, try to help create an environment with understanding that he's comfortable in, deal with him kinder, choose better techniques, and change how I respond, and the rest. He just has to step up, and I need to do better with boundaries. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of... Okay, let me start with the first thing you said. I need to get him to see out of that wall of perception. You're not going to be able to get him to see anything. It's not your job to do that. That's his responsibility. His perception is going to be a challenge because of his autism, but at some point, now that he knows he has autism, it is his responsibility to learn what that means, and to learn that he is perceiving you and perceiving the world in a different way. But I'm hearing you accommodate. I guess I need to learn and understand his... Yes, it is important to learn what autism is about. Yes. But be more understanding. Try to help create an environment with understanding. This keeps coming up, and I know you keep asking this. How do I understand without accommodating? Understanding means being aware and knowing our partner's limitations, but accommodating means giving up who we are for them. And yes, in relationships, there is some give and take, but I'm going to say this, and those of you who are autistic and who are listening to this now or replay, When I was in my years of working as a licensed therapist, and even now, I have never, ever, ever, I've always told my clients, the ones who've had depression, anxiety, I've worked with people who've had schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, all kinds of mental illness, and I've always told them it is never an excuse, ever. You can't break laws, you can't ruin relationships, you can't hurt people. You can't use your diagnosis as an excuse in your life, ever. And so when those of you who are in relationships with the people who have autism, those of you who have autism, it's your responsibility to learn now that you know you have autism, learn that you are really different. You didn't know, or you knew maybe that something was different. You do have a different way of thinking and a different brain. The people in your life that are neurotypical are different from you. They are different from you. You are different from them. You are responsible for yourselves. Neurotypical partners, you are responsible for learning about them and understanding them and being aware, but not giving up yourselves. Not giving up yourselves and what you need. No. Don't give up who you are because your partner has autism. Period. Understand it, know it, realize it, but don't give up who you are. It doesn't work when you give up who you are. Relationships don't work. But you will become depleted over time if you give up who you are for your partner. And those of you who are autistic, your partners will become depleted over time if they give up who they are for you. It's hard. This is hard. This is not easy. Life's not easy. I never said it was going to be easy. Us. Yes, Nathan, us. Not you or me. It is us. You are on the same team. And if your partner refuses to be on the team with you, that's a problem. But you can't carry the team by yourself. Nathan, Angie, he's your husband, not your child. Perception makes it more difficult, but not impossible. But yes, boundaries are a good thing. That's right. And perception, theory of mind, perception challenges doesn't mean that someone on the autistic spectrum can't ever see that there are other perceptions and other realities. It just makes it a bigger challenge. The difficulty in seeing other realities is different than the unwillingness. Individuals on the spectrum sometimes forget that other people have different perspectives. They don't realize it sometimes, but when it's pointed out to them, most of the people I work with are like, oh, right. There's a difference in that and an unwillingness once it's pointed out. That is a different issue altogether. Julie, you're welcome. I'm finally starting to get settled with my move. I got my fence built yesterday, so my dogs, I don't have to take them outside 3 times a day, so that's been a big help. Angie, I say that because before we dealt with each other unkindly, I stood up to him because I misinterpreted him as a jerk. I pushed at times when I didn't understand. He was needing meltdown, shut down space. When he closed his eyes or turned around when we talked, I mean, give accommodation to those things. Now that I know things are different, I can treat him with understanding. Okay, yeah, that totally understandable. So understanding when he's having a sensory overload. Yes, those are the things you do understand. But you also don't want, yes, you can have an understanding there and realize he's not just being a jerk. But also don't give up what you need in the moments when it's not a sensory meltdown. Okay. You're welcome, Nathan. I'm happy. I'm so glad that you joined us today. I love it when I have autistic folks here. It really creates such a great balance in our group. I love having you guys here. Thank you for being here, Nathan. Angie, glad you were here today. I'm glad this is starting to help you. I know you've been really struggling. All right. I will see you guys next week. I should be continuing still to be more active in the group, and I would really love to see some of you guys in this communication transformation group. I think I've already got some people enrolling, so again, space is limited. The registration closes on the 21st. You only got a week, so get registered. The link is in the group here. So, all right, y'all have a great weekend, and I will be seeing you soon. Bye, guys.